Okay, so thank you very much. So for my part of the presentation, I'm going to be focusing on issues of students entering EMI universities that maybe come from a traditional English language background in high school, and particularly focusing on the case of Japan. And so what we know from EMI research actually is that each country is contextually uniquely different and has their own unique challenges to face. And as Nicola said, needs analysis is always important to identify what particular needs are. But that being said, I think there's some value from contexts like Taiwan to learn from what's happening from some of their close neighbors like Japan. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the research that I've been doing there. As Nicola mentioned, EMI is part of a changing educational world where an increased importance is being placed on not only English language education, but now education through English. So globally, from Chile to Korea, we have seen major proposals for the greater use of English across educational systems. And so we've seen it being used increasingly as a medium of instruction in universities, which is having a knock-on effect in terms of how perhaps high schools prepare students for such study. And a lot of this has to do with the growth of academic English as a global lingua franca since the Second World War. And so what we can see from this graph is really from 1945, an exponential growth in the use of English as the academic lingua franca, to the point now that often a lot of research texts, new knowledge, is only published in English. And if people want to wait for translations, sometimes they never come, or they might take years to be translated. So there's this concept, especially at the university level, if you want to have access to cutting edge knowledge, cutting edge research, often that access is through English and knowledge and use of English. We also see Englishization. So this is the use of more and more English as part of the curriculum being intertwined with internationalization. And so often when universities try to internationalize, one avenue that they explore this internationalization is through Englishizing, so introducing more and more English within the curriculum. And so that's really where we've seen a growth of English medium instruction in educational systems. So what we've seen particularly, this has been happening for quite a number of decades in Europe, but still, we're seeing increased growth in recent years, in the most recent decade. So for example, there's been a 50 times growth in English taught bachelor's degrees at undergraduate programs in Europe in just 8 years. So this has moved from just 55 full English taught bachelor's programs to 2,900 English taught bachelor's programs in just 8 years. So this seems to be growing rapidly. We've also seen huge policy reforms in places like China and Japan, where EMI is encouraged, especially at top university, through highly funded policies. And often these policies are attached to internationalization agendas. So EMI has been described as a galloping phenomenon, and it's considered the most significant trend in educational internationalization. So English medium instruction is often seen as a way to offer internationalization at home. So that is, it's not just for international students, it's seen as a primary avenue to access an international education for local domestic students. So no longer, for example, do students need to go from Taiwan, need to travel to places like America or the UK to get an international experience or to study through English. The idea is that internationalization at home creates these opportunities within their own local university. And so this is where we've seen the growth of EMI, which Macaro defines as the use of English language to teach academic subjects other than English itself in countries or jurisdictions where the first language of the L1, where the first language of the majority of the population is not English. And so we see by this definition, we have moved from a focus of EFL, so English as a foreign language, where there's 100% focus on developing students' language abilities, to EMI, where we see that the focus is 100% on content. And so in this definition, there's no goal or explicit goal that of language learning aims. In reality, however, in places like Japan, we see that EMI is actually more closely aligned to something called CLIL. And so those who are unfamiliar with this term, this is content and language integrated learning. And so it's a form of studying content that also has a dual aim to improve students' language ability. But this has come with challenges as students move from studying English as a foreign language to using it to study content. And so here are some challenges that have been noted in the literature, that a lack of English proficiency influences students' performance. It's been noted to have detrimental effects on subject learning, and so students have trouble understanding lessons and lectures. It often takes students longer to complete English medium courses. There's a higher chance that they might drop out from those courses. Students have problems communicating disciplinary content. So that is, while they might be able to read or listen to a lecture and understand content, when it comes to producing, talking about or writing about that content, they have difficulties. There's often less interaction in EMI classes where students ask and answer fewer questions. And there are large problems with vocabulary. And so this has led to recent calls for an examination of challenges faced by students in various EMI contexts. So I'm going to focus a little bit on Japan, but first I want to really outline why I think Japan is an interesting context to explore EMI challenges. So Japan is a context that is observed to have low English proficiency, despite a strong emphasis on English language education in school. And so while English education is not new, the idea of learning through English is an emerging one, and it doesn't have the same educational history as many established EMI contexts. EMI focuses on domestic as well as international students. So there is a goal for EMI to not only create global citizens for local Japanese students, but also to attract international students, because university student numbers are declining in Japan due to the birth rate. So there's opportunities to learn different types, observe different types of EMI implementation in Japan, especially where language support is provided as part of EMI and local students study alongside international students. It's also interesting because previous attempts at internationalization of higher education have been met with harsh criticism. So it's possible to learn from some of Japan's mistakes. I hope you can see my slides okay. I notice a bit of flickering on my screen, but I hope that's just from me.
It's okay. We can see very clearly.
Great. So internationalization in Japan has a fairly long history, expanding decades from original policy called Kokusai-ka, which basically means internationalization, introducing international curriculum in high schools, to more recently, we see the Global 30, which was a policy that ran from 2009 to 2014. And the more recent ones, the current ones, are here in orange, with super global high schools and top global or super global universities, which are the current funded policies. A slight difference between, so Global 30 was probably the biggest one at the university level that came before the current ones. And it was one that actually was heavily criticized after its completion, because the main goal of Global 30 was to fund only 100% English taught programs, and they had to be new English taught programs with the idea of attracting international students. A lot of universities didn't meet their goal in terms of the number of university students. There was also some conflict in that a lot of domestic students were excluded from joining such programs. And so I think one of the issues with Global 30 was many of these programs were modeled on a kind of Western ideal, or an Anglophone ideal of what an English medium program would look like. So 100% in English, little support given, Often there were entry benchmarks required to enter, and sometimes, they were just made for international students. What we've seen more recently with the Top Global University project is more nurturing of programs for local students. And so we're seeing a lot of more bilingual programs emerge, or EMI programs emerge with a lot of integrated language support. And so they're not only English only courses. And the super global high school and top global universities are not only about English language education, they're about creating global leaders, global human resources. So basically graduates that are able to operate within a global workforce. So I'm going to draw on some of my studies in EMI in Japan, but I'm not going to go into details of the study. But this table just provides an overview of some of the work that I've been doing, exploring issues such as policy implementation, use of language in EMI, linguistic challenges, and success. And so drawing on this research that I've been doing with some collaborators in Japan, I want to make 3 main recommendations for lessons that we can learn. So first recommendation is that students in a context like Japan, where general proficiency might be a little bit lower, say, than in Northern Europe, where we've seen a lot of other EMI research, that in these contexts, language preparation and support to enter an EMI context is really needed. So research has previously suggested that an IELTS threshold of 6.5 is needed to study in English. But, and these are often the thresholds used to enter English-speaking universities in the UK. But these thresholds may not be appropriate for many educational contexts where a majority of students are below them. If a place like Japan introduced a threshold of 6.5 IELTS to enter the courses, many of these courses would simply have no students, right? The students are not at that level when they finish high school. Nor should a high school curriculum be teaching to a test merely to get students at that level. So, we don't really want to replicate what's happening in UK universities in EMI contexts. We want to adapt EMI contexts to cater to local needs of those students. And also my research in Japan has shown that students even above this threshold are at a disadvantage and have problems. And so what we need then is actually properly integrated language support as part of EMI programs to prepare students as in that transition year when they first enter university, to give them the academic skills they need to be able to thrive in an EMI environment. And then also concurrent. So while they're taking content courses, giving them language support so that they have the skills to carry out activities. Research in Hong Kong has also suggested students need extra EAP support in their early years of EMI, so particularly in that first semester or first year, focusing especially on vocabulary knowledge and academic skills like writing. So how important is proficiency then for EMI? Some of the research I've done in Japan has said that a general base of proficiency is actually important for reducing academic challenges, for increasing confidence, and increasing likelihood of higher grades in EMI. But proficiency is not the only thing of importance. So what we found was that high proficiency students still have challenges and other factors affect grades. And so maybe to prepare students for EMI courses, we kind of need to do 2 things. Like, yes, we need to build basic general proficiency, but we also need to provide them with academic skills, vocabulary knowledge to survive. So other things affect performance in EMI, such as that strong vocabulary basis, including academic vocabulary. So this is something that could be introduced more and more in high school curriculum to give them those academic skills. We found that high schools in Japan, so students who had soft EMI experiences in high school, did better at university. So those students, for example, that used English for academic purposes in high school, for example, essay writing, as opposed to studying for entrance exams, ended up doing better in university EMI classes. We also found that preparatory English classes at the start of university to teach academic literacy had a positive effect for their success, and that also concurrent specific language support classes were really useful to help learning of content. A recommendation then, my second recommendation, is at the university level and high school level to, in that transition period, to move from teaching English as a foreign language to teaching English for academic purposes, so teaching the listening, writing, reading skills in English for academic purposes, to teaching English for specific academic purposes. So what's the difference then between EAP and ESAP? So Flowerdew says, while general forms of EAP are concerned with the provision of English for students in all fields of study, ESAP is focused on the needs of students from specific disciplines. So maybe engineering students need slightly different support than, say, business students when using English in an EMI context. So ESAP classes are much more closely tied to disciplinary content being learned by the students, as well as specific academic needs, such as academic tasks and writing genres. And language teachers need to be integrated within subject-specific schools and faculties. So in the context that Nicola talked about, we actually saw English language teachers working within the discipline school. So it was a school of business, so that they were in close contact with content teachers to give students the right support. And then my final recommendation is that EMI pedagogy needs to change, moving from passive to active models of learning. And so, as Wilkinson notes, students may find that listening to lectures does not enhance their own productive competencies in speaking and writing in the subjects of study. And so for this reason, a student-centered approach has been argued as important for helping both academic staff and students. As Ball and Lindsay note, a learner is unconvinced that he or she has assimilated a concept until he or she has expressed it. So getting students to actually produce, display content knowledge rather than being passive receivers of it. Okay, so that's all I will cover today, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. This last slide shows some of those studies that I drew upon in making those recommendations.